guys, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. So I've got a problem. See this guy right here? Well, his name is Alfred, and he has this funny thing on top of his head, one of his sensors that he uses to get around, and I like to call it his nose. And his nose is so large that unless we put some of these underneath the couch on all the legs, and I think there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 of those legs, he can't get underneath it. He just hits his nose on it every single time, and so the underside of our couch doesn't get clean. So I went online to try and figure out, can I get any of these that look a little bit nicer and more like the legs of our couch? And the problem is that all of the normal risers that you would get for a couch are gigantic. They're like 1 inch or 2 inches, and I don't need that. I need like a ½ inch. Also, all of the wooden ones are like $10 a piece, and so that didn't really seem right to me, especially since I'm a woodworker, so I'm gonna go ahead and make some for ourselves. So the problem that I have is that there's 1,000,001 different ways that you could go about trying to replicate this guy right here, and the problem is, the way that I had this originally, you have 2 faces that are end grain and 2 that are edge grain, which means that if I'm trying to stain this to match the pre-existing feet that are there, it's just not going to look good because, well, it's pretty much impossible to stain end grain and face grain or edge grain to look exactly the same, at least easily, especially on wood that is as porous and open as pine. My other concern is that if I decide to go with something that would be completely edge grain all the way through, it's going to be thin enough in this direction that, for example, on this chunk of 4x4, it's going to be thin enough at the bottom that I can just break it in half. And so it's going to be really, really weak in this direction because I don't have a lot of wood supporting it, and I don't want this to happen because there's going to be a little bit of a pressure point right there in the middle, though it may not be an issue because it's going to be thick enough, something like this right here. But again, the edges are going to be much better to stain. So there's a couple of different ways that I'm kind of thinking about going about it, but I'm opting probably to go with this one because it's going to look better in the end, and I'm just going to have to mitigate the risk of it cracking somehow, or if they start to crack, see if I can't mitigate it. But if you guys are trying to design some of your own feet, those are some of the considerations you ought to take, because if you've got a really thick chunk that you're going to be using, well, you're probably in a pretty good spot to not have any issues because, well, it's going to be thick enough that it can just hold everything. But I'm going to go ahead and try and go ahead with this direction and see if we can't make some of my own custom risers. So you'll remember that on a 4x4 you actually only have 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, and the feet on the couch inside are 2 3/4 inches by 2 3/4 inches, and it expands out just a little bit on either side. So I'm going to try it at 2 3/4 to start with, and then we can always expand it out a little bit from there. So the first step that I'm going to do is go ahead and mark this guy out right here, and then we're going to use a setup that I just created to route this guy out and keep it secured down to the table, because this is a pretty small piece to be routing. Well, that, my friends, is what happens when you do your math wrong. Haha! Much better. Helps when you do your math right. Alright, so the idea here is I basically just wanted to keep this cookie stable, and so, I mean, without trying to build a gigantic jig for it, I basically have a compression clamp between these 2 pieces of wood, and this is going to give me a nice level surface for my router to walk on or to glide on. If I really wanted to make sure that this was perfectly level, I'd go ahead and run this through the planer and dimension this particular piece of wood right here, but I don't actually care if this is perfectly level because this is intended just to sit underneath the couch, so it doesn't need to be quite perfect. I just wanted it to be close. But what we need to check is to make sure that I can actually get to the center of this all the way around, and it looks like I'd be good, and then I've got an issue right here. This guy's too close to the edge, so I need to go ahead and bump this guy out. So in just a second, I'll get that fixed. And there we go. We should be good. Let's go ahead and give that a shot. Not bad for not having a CNC. I'll have to clean that up a little bit in the final product, but let's go see how well it fits. So it wasn't quite there. I'm gonna go ahead and take it off really close to the edge over here and see how close we can get on this test piece to see if it's A, at the right height, and B, how close I can actually get to the edge before it just becomes unstable. Well, if that's not flimsy, I don't know what is. I was concerned about it breaking in half, but I'm more concerned about these edges now. The problem is, if I have to go any wider than this 4x4, I've got to go up to a structural beam, which is like a 4x6 or a 6x6, and I don't have any wood in stock that is that large, or I've got to start laminating things, and I really wanted to avoid laminating things. So let's see if this works, because if not, things get more complicated. Success! Except there's a bunch of extra space all the way around, so I need to actually measure at this height what it is. But first, and most importantly, can Alfred get underneath it? Yes, it works. He fits. So I have the right depth set, and then we'll try and make a bunch of those, and not with so many gaps. And there we go, Alfred. Run, roam, and be free. And I kind of like the way these look. Really happy with the way they happened. Thanks, Alfred.